The Mask. Jonathan Reeves always seemed like the perfect husband. In the quiet suburbs of Chicago, among rows of tidy streets and white picket fences, his house stood as a picture of stability and success. His wife, Melissa, their 2 children, Sarah and Michael, and even the family dog completed the image. Every morning, Jonathan climbed into his black Lexus, drove the kids to school, kissed Melissa on the cheek, and headed downtown, where he worked as vice president at a major construction firm. To everyone around him, he was an example. A successful businessman, a devoted father, the kind of man who always waved to the neighbors. But behind the smile, behind the family man facade, lay something else entirely. There was another side to his life. Dark, hidden, almost theatrical. At night, when the children were asleep in their rooms, Jonathan stood before a mirror in the basement. He shed his tailored suit, slipped on a dark jacket, and pulled leather gloves over his hands. Behind a false wall in a closet, he kept the things no one could ever discover. Weapons, knives, stacks of cash sealed in black bags. His life had long since become a performance with 2 roles. By day he signed contracts, negotiated investments, sipped coffee in boardrooms. By night, he went to work on a job that paid far more than any corporation ever could. Jonathan Reeves was a contract killer. He didn't kill for pleasure. He was no sadist. To him, it was business, a transaction, a way to climb higher. Each victim, each eliminated competitor, moved him another rung up the ladder. When someone's company needed to collapse, or when his own career needed a boost, he vanished for a few hours and returned home as if nothing had happened. He played the double life so well that no one suspected. His colleagues thought he was simply worn down by stress. Melissa believed he was a loyal husband who occasionally grew cold from exhaustion. Only Jonathan knew the truth. His career was built on bones. That evening he came home later than usual. Melissa was setting the table, the kids waiting for their father so they could all eat together. Jonathan walked into the living room, smiled, hugged his daughter, and lifted his son into his arms. "Already started without me," he joked, tossing his briefcase onto the couch. Sarah laughed. Michael eagerly chattered about his school baseball game. Jonathan nodded along, but his thoughts were elsewhere. In his pocket, he still felt the cold metal of a key to an apartment where, just hours ago, he had left the body of a Detroit businessman. He knew how to switch in an instant. His face showed warmth, his words, tenderness. But inside, he sensed the 2 halves of his world were bleeding into each other. Sooner or later, someone would notice the cracks in his mask. Melissa's gaze lingered on him more than usual. She was perceptive, and though she trusted him, now and then a shadow of doubt flickered in her eyes. Jonathan felt it. He was certain she suspected something. That night, while the family slept, he sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey. Lights in neighboring windows flicked off one by one. Here he was a husband and father. Beyond the suburbs, he became a predator, one that even shadows fled from. And in his chest a question grew. How much longer could he wear the mask? The assignment. In downtown Chicago, the air smelled of money and steel. Glass towers mirrored the sky, while crowds rushed to meetings, each chasing their own little piece of success. Jonathan sat in a conference room on the 25th floor, listening as colleagues discussed charts, numbers, and new development projects. For most people there, it meant everything. For Jonathan, it was background noise. He already knew this day would bring him a job that would change everything. Officially, he was vice president of Harrison Development Group. Unofficially, he was its shadow, the hand that cleared competitors and paved the way for deals. His boss, Richard Harrison, was ruthless. But even he couldn't tolerate competition from someone too powerful to simply fight in court. After the meeting, Harrison summoned Jonathan to his office. The spacious room, with its panoramic windows, heavy mahogany furniture, and cigar smoke, carried the aura of old-school business. "Sit down, John," Harrison said, leaning back in his chair. "We've got a serious problem." Jonathan silently obeyed. He rarely interrupted. That was why people trusted him with their darkest secrets. "You've heard of Victor Mason?" Harrison asked. Jonathan nodded. Mason was a Detroit developer, recently expanding into Chicago. A man with a reputation for never backing down. He's moving in with his capital and stealing contracts right out from under us. Already poached 3 of our biggest investors. If we don't stop him now, in a year he'll own half our projects." Harrison's voice hardened. "Lawsuits? Don't make me laugh. He'll bury us with his army of lawyers." Jonathan understood immediately where this was going. "You know what needs to be done," Harrison said, locking eyes with him. "And this time, it has to be clean. No traces. No suspicions. It was official. A contract. And the most dangerous one yet. Killing a man of Mason's stature meant triggering the media, the police, maybe even the FBI. Where is he now?" Jonathan asked calmly. "He's here in Chicago, staying at the Riverside Plaza Hotel. Tomorrow he meets with potential partners. If he signs that contract, we're finished. You've got 2 days." Jonathan nodded, his mind already sketching a plan. That night, when he came home, Melissa sensed his distance. He sat at dinner, listened to the children, but his mind was far away. "Are you okay?" she whispered, once the kids ran off to watch cartoons. "Just a rough week," he replied. "Harrison's putting on the pressure again." He had mastered the art of telling the truth as if it were a lie, and lying as if it were the truth. Melissa nodded, but worry clouded her eyes. After midnight, Jonathan drove out of the garage in his old Chevrolet, the car he kept for nights like this. In the trunk, a sports bag held everything he needed: a Glock pistol, a knife, spare license plates, a black jacket, and a baseball cap. The Riverside Plaza Hotel towered over the city center. Glass and concrete, security at the doors, cameras on every corner. Killing someone here would be suicide. Jonathan knew that. So he chose another way. He spent the night in his car at a nearby parking lot, eyes on the hotel entrance. At dawn, he saw Victor Mason emerge with 2 bodyguards. Tall, confident, expensive suit, the smile of a man who always won. This is going to be tough, Jonathan thought. But he always found a way. The next morning at home, Sarah rushed up with a drawing. "Daddy, look. It's our family," she beamed, holding up the paper. Bright colors: him, Mommy, Michael, and her. Jonathan smiled, but a strange weight pressed in his chest. This time, he knew, things might not go as planned. And if they didn't, his children would grow up without a father. Yet the killer in him was stronger than the father. The contract had been given, and there was no turning back. 2 in 1. Jonathan had always known how to keep a straight face. At the company's morning meetings he looked flawless: expensive suit, confident voice, sharp arguments. He could win a debate without ever raising his tone. Colleagues respected him. Investors saw him as a man who could lead. And yet, in his pocket, a phone buzzed with encrypted messages from clients. Every vibration meant a new death. This time the target wasn't just another businessman. Victor Mason was rumored to have ties to politicians and the underworld. Taking him out would stir a storm. Jonathan knew it. And still, deep inside, he had already made his choice. That evening, Melissa was setting the table. She had noticed her husband growing distant, withdrawn, distracted, answering in clipped phrases, sometimes as if he hadn't even heard her. "John," she asked softly, "are you hiding something from me?" He looked up. The husband and father she knew should have smiled, kissed her, reassured her instantly. But the killer inside him whispered, "Don't rush." "Just a lot of work," he finally said. "Harrison's been driving us like machines." Melissa nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. She knew when Jonathan lied, he always paused too long. Dinner passed quietly. Sarah chattered about her school play. Michael bragged about his baseball team's latest win. Jonathan listened, even smiled. But in his head, he was mapping out how to get to Mason without leaving a trace. Later that night, while the house slept, Jonathan sat in his office reviewing hotel security blueprints he'd obtained through contacts. Riverside Plaza. Mason occupied 2 entire floors, guarded by 6 men. A fortress. But every fortress had a weakness. Jonathan had marked Mason's nightly routine: the fitness center. He insisted on training alone, no guards inside. That was the gap. Closing the laptop, Jonathan slipped into bed. Melissa was already asleep. He lay beside her, staring at the ceiling, his pulse quickening. A father, a husband, a friend, and also an executioner, a hunter, a shadow. Sometimes it felt like he was two different people. One tender, protective, teaching his kids. The other cold, detached, pulling a trigger without hesitation. And each night he asked himself, which one is real? The next day, Jonathan lunched with potential partners. He laughed, joked, signed contracts. But when one investor casually mentioned an evening meeting with Mason, Jonathan felt the spring coil tight inside him. Time was running out. By the time he got home, night had already fallen. Melissa was clearing the kitchen table. Late again, she said, not reproachful but tired. Sorry. Meetings dragged on. Their eyes met, her gaze a question, his a wall. That wall was growing thicker by the day. At midnight he drove off once more, headlights cutting through the dark. His double life pressed harder than ever. Tomorrow he would have to choose. He could no longer just be Jonathan Reeves, the loving father and successful executive. He had to be the man Harrison had molded him into. 2 in 1. And the mask was starting to crack. Fractures. Morning sunlight cut through the blinds in thin stripes across the wall. Melissa woke before her husband. Jonathan lay next to her, breathing evenly, like any tired working man. She brushed her fingers over his face, but unease clenched her chest. He had changed. Recently, he came home later and later, sometimes in the middle of the night. His eyes had grown colder, his answers shorter. She had always trusted him, but now, she wasn't sure. When he left for the office, Melissa began her usual cleaning ritual. Opening the closet, she found his suits lined neatly in order. But tucked away in the corner hung something strange. A dark jacket, thick fabric, a small stain on the sleeve, brownish, dried. Her breath caught. She touched it. The rough fabric. The stain. It looked like blood. Her heart pounded. She shoved the jacket back into place, as if afraid he might walk in at any second. But the fear didn't leave. Later that day, while gathering laundry, she found a watch in his pants pocket. Heavy. Expensive. One she had never seen before. On the back, an engraving, VM. Melissa didn't know what it meant, but she knew it wasn't his. She set the watch on the closet shelf and sat there for a long time, head in her hands. Thoughts spiraled. Was it an affair? Or something worse? That evening Jonathan came home, smiling at the kids, telling stories about work. Everything looked normal. But Melissa couldn't hear his words without suspicion anymore. "John," she said quietly after the children went upstairs, "I have a question." "What is it? Do you have a new watch?" For a split second, his face changed. Barely noticeable. But she caught it. "No," he said flatly. "Why?" "I found one in your things. With an engraving." Silence. In Jonathan's head, panic flared. He hadn't realized he'd pocketed it that night. Mason's watch. A trophy, taken unconsciously. Proof of power. Now, proof of danger. "Someone must have left it by mistake," he said dryly. "People come by my desk all the time." Melissa stared longer, her doubt hardening. She wanted to believe, but the lie felt too sharp. Later that night, once he slept, she returned to the closet. The jacket, the stain, the watch. The pieces were aligning into a terrifying picture. Her husband was hiding a second life. But what kind? The next morning, she called her friend Emily. "Em," she whispered, "I think something's wrong with John. He's keeping things from me." "You think he's seeing someone?" Emily asked. "I don't know," Melissa said. "But I'm scared it's something worse." Her voice trembled. Meanwhile, Jonathan drove downtown. He knew Melissa was beginning to suspect. Her eyes were heavier than any interrogation. If she uncovered the truth, everything would collapse. He was 2 in 1. But his two worlds were colliding. And the fractures in his mask were spreading deeper. Mistake. The evening was cold, the wind from the river cutting straight through to the bone. Chicago moved at its own pace. The hum of traffic, the flicker of neon signs, the smell of coffee and rain-soaked asphalt. Jonathan sat in his car on a dark street near the Riverside Plaza Hotel. His fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He was waiting for the moment. Victor Mason had just finished a meeting with potential partners and returned to the hotel. Security, as always, escorted him to the elevator, but once he hit the fitness room, he was alone. Jonathan knew that. He'd been watching for days. Tonight was his chance. He slipped into the hotel, blending with the crowd. A cap, plain clothes, a backpack slung over his shoulder, he looked like any other guest. The guard at the entrance didn't give him a second glance. On the lower floor, the air smelled of chlorine from the pool and the metallic tang of gym equipment. Jonathan pushed open the door to the fitness room. Just as he expected, Mason was there. The tall man in workout gear hammered away at the punching bag, each blow echoing across the room. For a moment Jonathan froze, watching him. Power, money, influence, all of it wrapped into one man. But in a few minutes, he'd just be another name on a list of the dead. Jonathan reached into his backpack and pulled out a thin wire, a quiet, reliable tool. "Mr. Mason," he called calmly, pretending to be a reporter, maybe hotel staff. Mason turned, frowning. Jonathan lunged. It happened fast. A strike, a struggle, silence. When the body hit the floor, Jonathan was breathing hard. Everything had gone exactly as planned. But that was when he made his mistake. In his rush, he didn't notice his sleeve snagging on a metal hook of the machine. The fabric tore, leaving behind a small fragment. Invisible to the eye, but not to those who'd be looking. He cleaned up quickly, checked the room. But that scrap of fabric stayed wedged in the steel. Leaving the hotel, Jonathan felt a strange relief. The job was done. Yet inside him, a shadow of unease had already taken root. He got home around 2 in the morning. Melissa was asleep, the kids too. Stepping into the bedroom, he stood by the bed for a long moment, staring at his wife. For a second, he imagined she'd wake and say, "I know everything." But she didn't. He lay down beside her and closed his eyes. The next morning the news roared, Victor Mason found dead in the hotel fitness room. Police suspect homicide. Jonathan sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, eyes on the TV. Melissa was watching him. "Did you know him?" she asked. "Only heard the name," he replied, not looking away from the screen. Her gaze lingered, sharp. She didn't believe him, but she stayed quiet. That same day, Detective Mark Donovan arrived at the crime scene. Middle-aged, solid build, sharp eyes. He'd seen enough death to tell accident from intent. He moved among the machines, studying the room. Then he saw it, a small piece of dark fabric caught in the steel. With tweezers, he lifted it carefully, inspected it. "Well," he muttered, "our ghost left us a signature." It was the first thread leading to Jonathan Reeves. That evening, the Reeves household was calm. Sarah did her homework, Michael played video games, Melissa washed dishes. Jonathan sat in his chair, but his thoughts were still in the hotel, on that torn scrap of fabric. He knew, this time he'd stepped wrong. And that mistake could be the beginning of the end.